Is Sony working on a cheaper PS5? How's it going, everyone, and welcome to PSReady. This is the weekly 5-topic news show where I pick 5 of my favorite stories about PlayStation from around the internet and deliver them straight to you. So in addition to the one I just mentioned, Jim Ryan gave us a pretty detailed update on the future of PlayStation. My game of the year for 2023 was just revealed. Is God of War Ragnarok actually coming this year? And Sony needs to fix these PS1 classics. And before we jump into it, this video is sponsored by me. That's right, I have a ton of links down in the description to pretty much any PlayStation 5 accessory you might want or need. I've got TVs, monitors, SSDs, controllers, pretty much anything you can think of. So if you want to help the channel out, use those links to buy any of those things because I get a little kickback. So during Sony's latest investor call, Jim Ryan had a slideshow where he was just basically going over the future of PlayStation, and one of the biggest focuses going forward for them is going to be PC gaming. Now, I noticed a lot of people were freaking out when they said they wanted to focus on other platforms, but it's been clarified that they weren't talking about Xbox. They were talking about PC because between the ports of Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, and God of War, they've made a combined $100 million off of all of those releases, which sounds a little small when you consider how big those games are, but they're all ports of older games that have sold through what they were going to sell on PlayStation. Like, for example, Horizon Zero Dawn is a 20 million copy seller on PlayStation, so they just added more revenue on top of it, and they made back the cost of porting that game almost instantly. And the same goes for Days Gone and God of War, which is pretty cool. Now, they didn't say specifically what games are coming next. We do know that they are working on the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection. There have been tons of rumors about Ghost of Tsushima, but also Returnal just showed up on Steam's database. It's not actually listed as Returnal, but stuff from the game that's basically only from that game, like the Tower of Sisyphus and Atropos, the planet that the game takes place on, was in the description of this mystery game that was added to Steam's database. So yeah, a lot of people are basically sitting there saying it's going to be Returnal. That makes a lot of sense to me because Housemarque has released quite a few of their games on PC. It's been a little while since Returnal came out. It is also included in the PS Plus collection that we're just getting now. So knowing that people on PS5 can get it for free, it seems like a good time to re-release it on PC and charge a full price for it so they can make more revenue on it, because, you know, streaming service revenue doesn't really count towards game revenue, and that's been a big problem Xbox has had with a lot of their first party titles. My big hope here is obviously that the gap between these games coming out on PlayStation and then PC just continues to get shorter and shorter. It seems very clear that we are going to approach that time period where we're going to get the games day one on PC. Sony has said they want to have at least half of their available games right now between their PS4 and PS5 releases on PC by 2025. It just costs money and takes time to port these things over, and I'm glad they're taking their time to do it because they started out pretty rough with the Horizon Zero Dawn port, but since then, every port has been largely pretty good. I mean, God of War is one of the best PC ports of all time. They're doing a better job than Microsoft. Like, let's be real here. Halo Infinite is still jacked up on PC. It's hard to run, and for how, you know, not great the graphics are, it should be a lot easier to run. So to see Sony running laps around Microsoft in that department is actually pretty cool. Next up, we get to talk about the most leaked Star Wars game. If that was an award, this would definitely win it. Star Wars Jedi Survivor was not only confirmed to be the title, we also got the first trailer for the game. And yes, we are sticking with Cal Kestis. It takes place 5 years after the first game. Things don't seem to be going great for Cal or BD1. We got no notice of what's going on with Seer or Grease. We don't know if they're even alive at this point, 5 years after the first game. The Stinger Mantis is shown in the trailer, but the windows are all blown out on it and it doesn't look like it's functional. We get another look at one of the villains of the game, who's the race of the Grand Inquisitor. I forgot what they're called, you know, the people with the white lines on their face and the markings and the sharp teeth. He looks like one of those guys. It's probably not the Grand Inquisitor just because his red markings on his head are different, but he has Cal's lightsaber at one point, which is kind of crazy. And also, there is someone chilling in a Bacta tank. It honestly reminded me of the planet they go to in the Bad Batch that had the abandoned clone factory. And then I was talking to my friend Jake from Game Ranks, and he mentioned that he thinks the person in the tank looks a lot like Cal, and we could be fighting a clone version of Cal. Maybe we were getting a teaser from Respawn when they gave us that skin for a New Game Plus where you get to be the Inquisitor version of Cal. Who knows? It just seems like this game's going to be awesome, and I am excited for it. Unfortunately, it's not coming this year. It's coming in 2023, but the interesting thing about it is that that people did the math, and the time frame of this game lines up perfectly with the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. So hopefully we get to see Cal and BD1 in this show in live action. I want Cal to be true canon in Star Wars, and the best way to make that happen is to get him to show up in a live action series. Next up, we have to talk about God of War Ragnarok, because the rumors that have been coming down the pipe about this game are that it's going to be delayed out of 2022, that Sony was waiting to see what was going to happen with Redfall and Starfield, and that when Microsoft actually delayed those games, it gave Sony the go ahead to delay this one. But it seems like we are actually going to get it in 2022 because the game was just rated in South Korea, which basically means the game is content complete. So what they're probably working on right now is just bug fixes and all of that little extra stuff that needs to be worked on before the game launches. Now, the actual rating has a release date of September 30th, 2022, which would be a good time to release this game because Sony traditionally doesn't have fall releases. Like, a lot of their games basically release towards the end of the summer, and then they leave the rest of the fall wide open for stuff like Call of Duty and all of the big late year releases we have to look forward to. But this year, there doesn't seem to be a lot coming out. We do know that Sony is going to fill that spot, which is rare for them, like I just mentioned, but a lot of people think it's going to be The Last of Us remake. So end of summer, around the end of September, seems like a good spot to release God of War Ragnarok. Either way, I'm happy to give Santa Monica Studio the benefit of the doubt here and say that if it does release by the end of this year, it's probably going to be ready. Like, it's not going to be one of these 80% done releases where we have to wait 6 months for a bunch of patches and all that. I think this is just going to be a single player game on top of that. So they're going to want to make sure that everything is buttoned up for launch. I'm glad that it's not getting delayed. We know that this fall is wide open, and it's good that Sony is filling those empty spaces. The only other big competition really seems to be Saints Row and the new Call of Duty. Other than that, there's not a lot of big AAA stuff coming out. So if Sony can kind of fill in those gaps with God of War Ragnarok and The Last of Us remake, I think that's going to create a really good end of the year for the PlayStation 5. God of War Ragnarok also seems to be the last PS4/PS5 dual release. So if we get that, and then we get whatever this Last of Us remake is, along with the multiplayer component that's been being worked on for The Last of Us Part 2, that maybe we'll also have a director's cut of that game. I think, again, Sony's going to have a great end of 2022 because they really have no competition for the rest of the year, which is crazy. I think Sony needs to get some bigger games out sooner rather than later. We got Horizon Forbidden West, but just like with the first game, they released that around the same time as Elden Ring, whereas the first game released around the same time as Breath of the Wild. So you're pairing basically the best, like, ultimate version of a Ubisoft game up against a genre-defining game, you know, a game that completely reshapes the open world genre. It hasn't worked out both times for Sony. They get a lot of sales on these Horizon games, but the buzz just isn't there. Like, no one really seems to be talking about them. And then Gran Turismo 7, as big of a franchise as it is, isn't really a system seller in the same way that something like God of War Ragnarok or The Last of Us remake or The Last of Us Part 2 director's cut, you know, these bigger franchises that have more mass appeal would be. And Microsoft has a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe. I mean, we have Hellblade 2, we have Starfield, we have Returnal, we have Elder Scrolls 6. It looks like Indiana Jones is not going to be exclusive, but that's still going to be a big game coming from them. So Sony needs to take advantage of this time that they have where none of these games are actually coming out and to release some cool stuff that doesn't have any competition. I think that's an important thing for them to do because people are frustrated right now, right? They're mad that they can't get a PS5 and they need a good reason to keep being a Sony fan because you can just walk into a store right now and at the very least get an Xbox Series S. Next up, let's talk about these PS1 classics because the situation is not great. So the drama surrounding these right now is that a lot of these releases are using the PAL versions of these games, which is like not American versions of these games. And the issue there is that A, it doesn't look as good as 60 hertz because you're running a 50 hertz game on a 60 hertz TV. It's not going to look good in any situation. And also B, there's frame pacing issues, which basically creates a stuttering effect. Like, you're seeing some frames longer than others and you can't really do anything about that. The only thing they could really do is find like a halfway in between point, which would take a lot of math. And I don't think that's the effort they're going to put in. The fix that Sony came up with for this was to patch all of these games that are using the PAL version to run at a spoofed 60 hertz, but you're seeing some frames longer than others and it's creating a ghosting effect. So when you move the camera and your character along with it, you're going to see a ghosting effect, which just doesn't look very good. Obviously, the issue for Sony is they had to go back and do a lot of work with these ROMs to make sure that trophies could work with them, right? Because they're adding trophies in for some of these games like Siphon Filter. So they're in kind of a catch-22, right? They need these games to launch with this service because they advertised a lot of classics coming along with the service, and it's going to take time for them to add trophies and do all the fixes that they did on on the North American version. So really, the only option they had was to do these crappy patches they've released for these games. It's not a good situation overall. I personally hope they are going back to the drawing board on this a little bit, and they go back and they fix the North American versions, add in the trophies that are there on these PAL versions, and as they finish them, release them one at a time. It's not a great solution, it just seems like the best solution out of a batch of bad solutions. This is really frustrating, especially when you consider how good the backwards compatibility is on Xbox consoles. I mean, even on the Xbox Series S, you can play pretty much any game from the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, the original Xbox, it all just pretty much works. On the Xbox Series X, things are even better because you can take your Xbox original discs and your Xbox 360 discs and just put them in the console. It'll download the digital version of that game, but you're still using your old discs, which is pretty cool. Sony has nothing in terms of that. Like, you can't take your PS1 disc for Ape Escape, for example, and put it in your PS5, and then it'll give you the digital version of Ape Escape. You just can't do that. You have to either rebuy it or you have to subscribe to PlayStation Plus Premium. I also heard on the PlayStation podcast Sacred Symbols that there's a theory that the reason they went with these PAL games is because PAL games came along with more language options. So if they put the trophies in those games, they could put them up on a bunch of different stores instead of using different localized versions. I don't know. Either way, I hope they fix this soon because it's really frustrating. And the last news story I have for you guys today is about a potential PlayStation streaming stick. I mean, we just got this revamped version of PlayStation Plus that allows you to stream PS3 and PS4 games, and in the future, we're going to see PS5 games on this service. So obviously, Sony is looking at Microsoft and saying, oh, they have this Keystone device coming out. It's going to be a streaming stick where you plug it into your TV, connect an Xbox controller to it, and you can stream Xbox Game Pass games from the internet. Obviously, that's appealing to them, but they have done something similar in the past with PC, where they released a stick where you would plug it into your PC or Mac, and it would either allow you to connect to your PS4 at home over the internet or use PlayStation Now to connect your DualShock 4 to your PC and play games like Bloodborne. That was like the weird thing that they did where they said, oh yeah, Bloodborne is totally available on PC. You just have to buy our $25 USB stick to connect your controller to it, and then you'll be good to go. It's obviously not the best solution, but it is a solution for people who can't get into that ecosystem right now because PS5s are so unavailable, but also the fact that Microsoft is doing it basically forces Sony's hand. They have to have some sort of competitor. I mean, that's the only reason we're seeing this revamped PS Plus that largely no one really asked for or even wants. Now, I can see why Sony would want to make something like this because it's not that expensive. They already know how to do it and they can get people into the PlayStation ecosystem for cheap. I personally wish they would just focus on a handheld. We have seen so many advances in terms of handheld technology. We're seeing great chips and stuff like the Steam Deck, which basically uses a shrunk down APU that's very similar to what we're already seeing in the PS5. And if AMD is already making a chip like that, I could see them wanting to partner up with Sony to create some successor to the Vita. I mean, I know the Vita didn't succeed when it came out. That's a real reason for Sony not to consider making a successor to it. But if they did it the right way, which basically means using micro SD instead of proprietary memory cards, making sure they had enough games to support it at launch that were made by in-house studios, and they don't abandon it right out of the gate, which basically made people never want to buy the Vita in the first place, I think this thing could really take off and would be a great option in comparison to a streaming stick, because streaming sucks, honestly, and especially on PlayStation Now, it is not great. It's not even that good on the Xbox side, but when you compare the Xbox streaming to PlayStation streaming, the Xbox streaming is running laps around it, and that sucks. Either way, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you feel, this is something we're probably going to see in the future. Hopefully it doesn't take away from Sony's focus on, you know, actual hardware that can run these games on the actual hardware. Jim from the future here with some breaking news about the new state of play. Guys, there have been some rough ones in the past, but I feel like they've been building up to this one because this was by far the best state of play. I love horror games. Survival horror is alive and well. I'm just gonna go through these games as they come to mind. Starting out with the first game they talked about, Resident Evil 4 Remake. I don't know why. I thought this game was gonna take a lot longer than it is. It's coming out March 23rd, 2023, right around my birthday. Could not be more excited for this game. Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game of all time, period, like flat out. I played it in one sitting the first time I played it, and I bought it on every console since. I don't have enough good things to say about this. I'm super excited. We're also getting PSVR 2 content for this game, which sounds awesome. Playing through the village scene at the beginning, the horde mode in VR. I played through that on my Oculus Quest 2 and it was excellent, super cool experience. So seeing it in the new graphics of PSVR 2 sounds awesome. We're Resident Evil Village is getting a PSVR 2 patch. I think people are going to really enjoy that. That game's more actiony than Resident Evil 7, which makes it like a perfect candidate for VR. Of course, the Callisto Protocol from the creator of Dead Space. It looks like Dead Space, super gory, super bloody, a cool setup for a story. I am all in on that. Spider-Man coming to PC on August 12th was a huge surprise because it's one of the games that was not in the Nvidia leak. I didn't think they would ever do that because Spider-Man is one of Sony's biggest games ever, but the idea of taking that portable on the Steam Deck, it's just like incredible to me. I was excited to see Nix's on that little badge at the beginning. That was really cool as well. Of course, Horizon Call of the Mountain. This is the new big PSVR game that's going to launch PSVR 2. It finally moved outside the boat. We got to see some climbing, we got to see some combat. The graphics look like they're somewhat on par with the PS4 version, at least, of the game, which is great considering how high the frame rate needs to be with PSVR games. Stray was a huge standout because it's coming to PS Plus Extra and Premium day one on July 19th. That's noteworthy because it's a smart release for PS Plus. You can actually keep the service sustainable by having smaller games like that might not sell a million copies right out of the gate. Give the developer a lump sum of cash to make sure that it's on PS Plus day one. Then more people are definitely going to be inclined to play it. It's like a win-win for the developer and for Sony. I think that's a great call. If you're one of the people who got Horizon Forbidden West at launch and bounced off of it to play Elden Ring at the time and you kind of want to go back, now would be a great time because they're releasing a free patch that includes stuff like New Game Plus, Transmog, a whole bunch of other fixes that people have been asking for, a better performance mode. There's a ton of stuff coming to that game for free. So if you've been waiting to try Horizon Forbidden West or you bounced off of it, now would be a great time to go back to it for sure. Final Fantasy 16, I was curious about that game because it started out as Final Fantasy Versus 13 and kind of evolved into its own thing. So I was wondering if they were going to kind of go back to the more turn-based elements we saw in Final Fantasy 13, but no, it looks like they're sticking with action, super dark, super brutal. It looks like an origin story for the summons. I am very hyped for that game. It's coming out summer 2023. The release slate is finally stacked, but the one game that was missing was The Last of Us. What is going on with The Last of Us remake here, guys? I need to know because Sony doesn't have a big game this fall, but we are going to see Sony at the Summer Games Fest next weekend. I feel like that'll be a good time to announce The Last of Us, get a little bit higher profile release timing on that. Seems like a smart move on Sony's part. Either way, this was an incredible state of play. I am super excited about Resident Evil and all of the survival horror that was announced. I mean, I just remembered. I forgot about Walking Dead Saints and Sinners 2. That's one of the biggest VR games in general on PC and MetaQuest. So like, yeah, having the sequel be on PSVR 2, super smart move on Sony's part. They're finally delivering. I don't think there's anything to complain about. Even the games that weren't geared towards me, like Eternites and then the rollerblading game, they look cool, right? Like at the worst, this thing looks great, not for me. And I think that's what Sony should be striving for with these state of plays.